This happened to a young man named Victor who loved exploring abandoned places. He was always drawn to old buildings, forgotten by people, mysterious corners where every crack and creak seemed to tell a story. But he had heard about this house since childhood. They said it stood deep in the forest, far from any roads, and took people forever. No one who entered it ever came back. Victor couldn't resist the temptation. He decided to prove it was just a myth. At night, he ventured into the forest. Silence surrounded him, broken only by the sound of his footsteps on damp leaves. His flashlight lit the path, but the light seemed weak. The thick fog swallowed it whole. As he walked, the forest seemed to change around him. Trees that were once in the distance now seemed impossibly close, their twisted branches reaching for him. The path beneath his feet grew uneven, as if it were shifting under him. His breath quickened when he noticed faint whispers on the wind, low and unintelligible. Were they coming from the trees? He stopped and looked around, but there was no one. He was haunted by the villagers' words, "If you enter, the house won't let you go. You will become part of it." The path grew narrower. The trees leaned closer together as if trying to stop him. Shadows shifted at the edge of his vision, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. The wind suddenly died down, and he felt a growing pressure, as if the forest was holding its breath. Finally, the house appeared before him, a massive structure with smooth walls and not a single window. Tree roots coiled around its base, as if trying to hold it in place. Victor stepped closer. The door was made of stone, deeply cracked, as if someone had been trying to break it down for centuries. Strange symbols were etched into it, ones he couldn't understand. His hand, almost against his will, reached for the handle. As the door opened, he was hit with the rotten smell of dampness and age. Inside, it was pitch dark. It seemed as if the walls absorbed all light, and the silence was so thick it pressed against his ears. He hesitated at the threshold, feeling as though unseen eyes were watching him, waiting for him to step inside. He stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. "Don't be scared," he told himself. "It's just an old house." But each step he took echoed, and with every sound, his heart beat faster. The walls were damp and cracked, and his flashlight beam revealed marks, scratch marks, as if someone had clawed desperately at the walls. He saw something scrawled there in jagged letters. "You found me. Now you'll never leave." When Victor decided to turn back, he discovered the door was gone. In its place was a smooth, plastered wall. The air grew heavier, and a low groan echoed through the house, like the structure itself was alive. Panicking, he searched the room, hoping to find another exit. Every corridor led him back to the same place, a small room with a mirror in the center. In the mirror, he saw his reflection, but his double moved differently. At first, it mimicked him perfectly, but then it tilted its head, smiled, and whispered, "You'll like it here." Victor stumbled backward as the reflection pressed its hand against the glass, cracking it. A hidden door behind the mirror creaked open, and Victor, ignoring the warning in his gut, stepped through. He found himself in a room filled with dolls. They sat in rows, their heads turned toward him. Some of them had human eyes, their irises unnaturally vivid. The air in the room felt suffocating, and a faint, childlike giggle echoed through the space. Victor stepped forward, and the dolls turned their heads to follow him. Their movements were mechanical but deliberate. "This can't be real," he muttered. One of the dolls stood up, its head twisting unnaturally as it said, "You're next." The other dolls began to move, their tiny hands reaching for him. Their mouths opened, releasing a guttural scream that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the house itself. Victor bolted for the door, but the hallway had twisted into a maze. The floor creaked beneath his feet as if it could give way at any moment. Finally, he found a staircase leading downward. The walls were damp and covered in slimy moss. The air grew colder, and the darkness ahead felt deeper. At the bottom, he entered an enormous room where a massive tree grew from the ground. Its roots twisted around bones and objects, watches, shoes, photographs. On the tree's branches hung pictures of terrified faces. As he approached, he noticed that the faces were alive, their eyes following him. One of the photographs showed him, taken in that exact moment, his face pale with fear. Suddenly, the tree began to groan, and Victor felt the ground beneath him tremble. Behind him, the hallway he came from was no longer there, only darkness. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, tall and skeletal, its limbs too long, its face devoid of features except for a wide, toothy grin. Victor backed away, but the tree's roots wrapped around his ankles, holding him in place. The figure reached for him, its bony fingers inches from his face. Victor closed his eyes, expecting the end. But when he opened them, he was back in the forest. The house was gone, but something had changed. His body felt heavy, and when he looked into a nearby puddle, his reflection stared back at him with empty black eyes. He stumbled back toward the village, but the whispers in his head grew louder. He couldn't remember how he had gotten out of the house. All he could remember was the voice, "You're mine now." Villagers saw him wandering aimlessly through the forest, muttering the same thing over and over. "I found the house, and now it's inside me." The house continued waiting for its next victim.